The hotel lobby was alive with noise. Guests hurried past, dragging suitcases and checking their phones, talking loudly to friends or family. The chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting light on the polished marble floor, and the soft hum of the air conditioning mixed with the distant sounds of traffic outside. Everyone seemed to have a purpose, a destination, or an urgent schedule. In the middle of all this movement, there was a man who went almost completely unnoticed. He was the janitor. Quiet, steady, and always in the background, he moved with care and routine. His uniform was plain and worn, but neat. His shoes squeaked softly against the shiny floor as he pushed a mop across the marble, methodically cleaning up footprints and dust. The janitor didn't rush. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He simply did his work, silently making sure everything around him was in order. He had worked at this hotel for many years. Every day he arrived early, before most guests even woke up, and stayed late, after the last lights in the lobby had dimmed. Over time he had become almost invisible. Guests rarely noticed him. The bellhops and receptionists waved politely, but conversations with the visitors usually skipped over him. He was not unkind, but he had learned long ago that no one paid attention to the people who kept things running quietly behind the scenes. Despite the lack of attention, there was a calm confidence in him. He moved with care, like every small action mattered, even if no one saw it. His eyes, soft and thoughtful, occasionally wandered to the grand piano in the corner of the lobby. The piano was beautiful, polished black, with gleaming ivory keys. Sometimes, when the lobby was empty and the echo of footsteps had faded, he would pause and just look at it. It wasn't that he wanted attention. He didn't need anyone to notice him. But the piano called to him in a way nothing else did. There was a quiet magic about it. It was more than an instrument. It was like a doorway into another world, a place where feelings could flow freely without words. And though the janitor's hands were usually busy cleaning floors or wiping tables, he often imagined what it would feel like to sit there and play. Most people in the hotel never thought twice about the piano. They might glance at it on their way to check in or take a photo by it, but it was just a piece of furniture to them. A decoration, a symbol of elegance. But the janitor knew it could do more. He had learned from a very young age how music could move people, how a single melody could make someone pause, remember, or even cry. And although he had not played in years in front of anyone, he carried that understanding quietly inside him. Every day, he went about his work with careful precision. He polished the brass handles on the doors until they gleamed. He vacuumed the carpets in slow, straight lines. He straightened chairs in the lobby cafe and wiped down the tables, making sure there were no crumbs or smudges. Even when guests hurried past, ignoring him completely, he continued without complaint. There was a rhythm to his work, almost like a dance he performed every day, a silent music that no one heard but that filled the space around him. He had seen countless events in the lobby. Weddings, parties, business meetings, and social gatherings had come and gone over the years. He had cleaned up after birthday celebrations, mopped the floors after spilled champagne, and quietly replaced broken decorations. And always, he noticed the little things that others overlooked. A child left behind a forgotten toy, a guest's scarf dropped near the piano, a small flower petal from the arrangements on the reception desk. He collected these little details and returned them to their owners without fuss, never seeking recognition, but sometimes, even in the busiest of moments, he could feel the weight of the invisible barrier between him and the world around him. He would watch guests laughing and talking, families reuniting, couples holding hands, and wonder if anyone could see him as more than the person who swept the floors. And in those moments his gaze would drift back to the piano. He imagined sitting there, letting his hands float over the keys, and for a few minutes, being seen for who he really was, not the quiet janitor, but the man with a story and a song inside him. There were nights when the lobby was empty, when the only sounds were the faint ticking of the clocks and the soft whirring of the ventilation system. On those nights he would sometimes practice in secret. He would gently press the keys, letting the music flow softly so it didn't disturb anyone. The melodies were simple at first, hesitant, almost shy. but they carried a weight that words could never express. And in those moments he felt free. Free to be heard, free to be felt, free to share something that existed quietly inside him but had never found a listener. It was during one of these quiet evenings that something shifted. The janitor was polishing the floor near the piano when he noticed a small group of guests gathering near the lobby's center. A private event was about to start, and the pianist scheduled to perform had not yet arrived. The janitor paused, unsure what would happen next, but something inside him stirred a mixture of curiosity and a quiet hope. He had always imagined that one day someone would recognize the music in him, even if only for a few notes. And as he glanced at the piano, polished and ready, he felt that maybe tonight could be that night. He finished his work, wiped his hands on a clean cloth, and stepped back, observing the guests. They were busy talking, laughing, adjusting their attire, completely unaware of the man standing near the piano. No one expected anything unusual to happen. He felt a strange calm wash over him, like a gentle wave of certainty. The piano wasn't just an object anymore, it was an invitation, and he felt ready to answer it, even if he wasn't sure how. The janitor had spent a lifetime in the background, unnoticed, yet fully present. He had learned to observe, to understand, and to feel deeply without being recognized. And now, as he stood near the piano, he realized that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the quietest people. He had no audience yet, no applause, no expectation of praise, but in his heart he felt the quiet thrill of possibility. The music inside him was ready, waiting for the right moment to be heard, and perhaps, just perhaps, this could be the night when it finally would, even as guests continued to chatter and move around. The janitor's calm presence near the piano created a subtle shift. The air seemed a little softer, the lighting a little warmer. There was a sense of anticipation he couldn't explain, as if the room itself was holding its breath. And as he placed his hands gently on the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingers, he knew one thing clearly: he was ready. Ready to step out of the shadows, ready to share the music that had lived quietly in his soul for so long. And in that quiet, ordinary hotel lobby, with all its noise and busyness, a small but powerful change was about to begin. The world hadn't noticed him before, but the janitor had always known that music had a way of reaching hearts, of telling stories that words could never touch. And tonight, perhaps, those stories would finally find their listeners. The night of the event had arrived, and the hotel lobby was slowly transforming. Soft lights were placed around the room, and flowers were arranged on tables, adding a gentle warmth to the otherwise grand space. Guests arrived in small groups, chatting quietly, adjusting their clothes, and laughing at inside jokes. The mood was lively, but there was a noticeable tension. Something was missing. The pianist who was supposed to perform had not arrived, and the manager was visibly anxious. He paced behind the reception desk, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Without music, the event could feel flat, even disappointing. The guests had been looking forward to it, expecting the soft melodies to fill the space as they mingled and celebrated. Now, the absence of that music left a small but noticeable void. The janitor, who had been quietly finishing his usual tasks, noticed the manager's concern. He was polishing the lobby's brass fixtures near the piano when the manager's eyes met his. There was a moment of silent understanding, a brief exchange that said more than words ever could. The manager walked over slowly, unsure but hopeful. Would you mind sitting at the piano for a while?" the manager asked gently, almost hesitantly. His voice carried a mix of nervousness and trust. "We don't have anyone else right now, and, well, maybe you could help." The janitor froze for a moment. The request was simple, almost casual, but it felt enormous. He had never performed in front of anyone, not in years. Most of the time, his music existed only in his own thoughts, a private world where no one else could enter. But now, the invitation was real, and the audience was waiting. His heart beat a little faster, but it wasn't fear, it was a quiet excitement, like a small spark waiting to catch fire. He shook his head slightly, almost in disbelief. I haven't played in front of anyone in a long time," he said softly. His voice was calm, almost timid, but there was a hint of determination hidden beneath it. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing gently on his shoulders, but also a strange sense of rightness. Somehow, it felt like this was meant to happen. The manager nodded, understanding. He gave a reassuring smile. Just do what feels right. You don't have to play anything fancy, just let the piano sing however it can. The words were simple, but they carried trust, and that trust gave the janitor a small boost of courage. He walked slowly toward the piano, each step measured, each movement careful. Guests were still chatting nearby, unaware of the quiet tension building at the corner of the room. Some glanced over briefly, noticing the janitor approaching the piano, but they didn't expect anything remarkable. To them, he was just the janitor, quietly doing what he always did. Another part of the background of their evening. When he reached the piano, he paused. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling their smooth surface beneath his touch. The smell of polished wood and the faint echo of past music filled the air. It was familiar, comforting, and almost alive. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and remembered the countless times he had imagined this very moment. The music had always lived in him, waiting for a chance to escape into the world. Finally, he lowered himself onto the piano bench. The chair creaked slightly under his weight, but it was a small sound compared to the quiet anticipation that had settled over the room. He placed his hands gently on the keys, feeling their texture, their potential. There was no need to rush. The music would come naturally, he knew, as long as he let it flow from him. The guests had begun to notice the change in the atmosphere. Conversations softened and some stopped entirely. A hush spread across the room almost instinctively. There was something in the air, a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen, even though no one yet knew what it was. The janitor's calm presence, so steady and unassuming, seemed to draw attention without even trying. He pressed the first key. A single, clear note filled the space. It was soft but precise, carrying a warmth that seemed to reach into the corners of the room. The sound was simple, but it held a weight, a depth that made people pause. Guests turned their heads, curiosity replacing their casual chatter. Even the manager stopped pacing and watched quietly from a distance. As his fingers moved across the keys, the music began to take shape. It wasn't a practiced performance with rigid patterns or complicated arrangements. It was something far more human, something honest. Each note seemed to carry a story, a reflection of years spent unnoticed, of quiet patience, of small joys and unspoken sorrows. The melody was gentle yet powerful, drawing people in without force. Guests who had been talking moments ago stopped entirely. A group of young professionals froze mid-conversation, eyes widening slightly as they listened. An older couple near the window clasped hands, their attention captured by the unexpected beauty. Even children, usually restless and fidgety, stood still, sensing the importance of the moment. The music was speaking directly to them, bypassing words, bypassing thought, touching something deep inside. The janitor's eyes remained closed as he played, but his body was fully present. He leaned slightly into the piano, feeling the vibrations under his hands. He allowed himself to be carried by the music, letting it express everything he had kept inside. Each note was honest, each pause intentional, each chord a small message of hope, sadness, and joy intertwined. It was music born from life itself, not from practice or performance, and that made it real. As the melody continued, something remarkable happened. The room began to change. The air seemed lighter, warmer. Guests who had been distracted by their phones, by conversations, or by small worries suddenly focused entirely on the piano. Eyes glistened with unshed tears. Shoulders relaxed. Even the manager, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, felt a lump in his throat. He had seen many performances in his life, but nothing like this. For a moment it was as if time itself had slowed. The world outside the hotel, with its noise and pressure, faded away. The only thing that mattered was the music and the story it told. It was not flashy or showy, but it was perfect in its sincerity. The janitor's melody reached hearts in a way that no grand performance ever could. It was raw, human, and deeply moving. Some guests wiped tears from their eyes, barely noticing. Others held their breath, not wanting to break the spell. Even the youngest children were quiet, sensing something magical that they could not explain. The music, simple and honest, had the power to connect everyone in the room across ages, backgrounds, and experiences. It was a shared moment, a collective understanding that beauty and emotion could come from the most unexpected places. The janitor continued playing, completely absorbed in the moment. He did not look up. He did not seek recognition. All that mattered was the music, the way it flowed from him and into the hearts of those listening. Each note was a testament to years of quiet patience, of living unnoticed yet fully aware of the world. It was proof that even the most overlooked people could carry something extraordinary within them. As the first few minutes passed, the room was completely silent except for the piano. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint ticking of a clock were the only background sounds, but even they seemed to retreat in reverence to the music. Guests felt emotions they hadn't expected, memories of loved ones, moments of joy and sorrow. Long-forgotten dreams all stirred by a melody born from the heart of a man who had never sought the spotlight. When the janitor finally paused for a brief moment, the room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the music had planted a seed in each person, a quiet acknowledgement that something extraordinary had just happened. The guests had been witnesses to more than just a melody. They had been touched by a story, a life lived quietly but fully, expressed in a language beyond words. The manager took a small step forward, his eyes shining. He had known of the janitor's talent in private, but experiencing it like this, in front of an audience, was overwhelming. He felt a mixture of pride, surprise, and deep respect. And as he looked around at the guests, he could see that the janitor had achieved something remarkable. He had captured the attention and the hearts of everyone in the room without saying a single word. The janitor opened his eyes slightly, glancing at the audience for the first time. There were no smiles of polite applause, no polite clapping. Instead, there was awe. There were tears, nods of silent appreciation, eyes wide with surprise. People who had never noticed him before were suddenly seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. And he smiled quietly, not because of recognition, but because the music had done exactly what he had hoped it had spoken, and it had been heard, even as he continued to play. The thought remained in his mind. This moment wasn't about fame or applause. It was about connection. It was about letting something inside you be shared, even if just for a few minutes, and touching others in a way that only music could. And for the janitor, who had spent a lifetime in quiet service, this was more meaningful than anything else he had ever experienced. By the time the first part of the performance ended, the entire room felt transformed. The guests were no longer just individuals in a busy hotel lobby. They were part of a shared experience, a moment of beauty that had arrived unexpectedly but was deeply welcomed. And the janitor, humble and quiet as ever, had become the center of it, not because he sought it. Boo. The first note had barely faded when he continued playing, letting his fingers glide gently across the keys. Each sound seemed to float in the air, delicate yet full of meaning. He didn't follow any sheet music. There was no pattern, no plan. The music came from his heart, carrying memories, emotions, and the quiet stories of his life. Every note felt alive, as if the piano itself had been waiting all these years for him to tell its story. At first, the guests were cautious. Some leaned slightly forward, unsure what to expect. They had seen pianists before, but there was something different in the way this man played. His music wasn't just skillful. It was alive. It spoke in a language everyone understood without words. Some visitors exchanged quick glances as if to ask, "Can you feel it too?" And they could. The melody grew slowly, softly weaving between highs and lows, gentle pauses and flowing passages. It was as if he was telling a story without speaking, about hope, loneliness, patience, and quiet courage. Each chord seemed to carry years of unseen effort and resilience, a life lived in the background while others rushed past. For some, the music stirred memories they hadn't thought about in decades. An elderly man remembered his childhood piano lessons, long forgotten but suddenly alive in his heart. A young woman thought of her grandmother, who had played softly for her as a child. The janitor didn't look at the audience. His eyes were closed, focused entirely on the piano and the emotions moving through him. His hands moved naturally, almost instinctively, as if guided by something deeper than logic or training. The sound he created was tender yet commanding, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. It wasn't a performance in the traditional sense. It was a gift, offered freely and humbly. Some guests felt tears forming, though they tried to blink them back. There was no shame in crying here. The music demanded honesty. A young man who had been worried about a stressful day found himself letting go of tension, feeling a wave of calm wash over him. A little girl held her mother's hand tightly, listening with wide eyes, sensing something magical she couldn't yet explain. The janitor's music had the power to connect everyone, silently breaking barriers that no one else could dot as he played. The piano seemed to come alive. The sound echoed softly off the marble walls, filling the entire lobby with warmth. It was not loud or overpowering, but it wrapped around the guest like a gentle embrace. People leaned slightly toward the piano, unconsciously wanting to be closer to the source of this unexpected beauty. Even the manager, who had seen many performers over the years, stood silently, marveling at the depth of emotion pouring from the janitor's hands. The melody changed subtly, moving from light and airy notes to deeper, more resonant chords. It was as if the janitor was guiding the audience through a journey. Each change in tone represented a different feeling: joy, sadness, longing, and finally hope. The music was layered with emotion, yet it remained simple enough that everyone could feel it, even without understanding the technical skill behind it. This was music that spoke directly to the soul, bypassing thought and reaching the heart. Guests began to notice small details they had overlooked before. The subtle tremble in a high note, the pause that seemed perfectly timed, the way his fingers lingered on certain keys just long enough to let the emotion resonate. It was as if he was breathing life into the piano itself. The music had a natural flow, gentle but unstoppable, carrying the listeners along with it. Some people quietly wiped their eyes. Others held their hands over their hearts. A few couldn't help but take deep breaths, overwhelmed by the beauty and sincerity of the performance. It was rare to find a moment that captured everyone's attention completely, but here it was. No one wanted to speak, move, or distract themselves. The entire room was united by something powerful, something unexpected, a simple melody played by a man who had always been invisible. The janitor's hands never faltered. Each note carried intention, each chord carefully placed, yet it all felt effortless. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a storyteller, a guide through emotions that words could never fully capture. The music was alive with his experience. The quiet moments of his life transformed into something others could feel deeply. Every visitor, from the youngest child to the oldest guest, was swept along in this shared experience. At one point, the melody shifted into a gentle, flowing rhythm, soft but insistent. It was like a river of sound moving steadily through the room, uniting the hearts of everyone present. A young couple standing near the window looked at each other, tears glistening in their eyes, holding hands as if silently promising to cherish each other more. A group of business people paused their conversation, drawn into a quiet reflection they hadn't expected to experience at a hotel event. Even the staff, usually so busy and unnoticed, felt the music's effect. The bellhop paused with a luggage cart, mesmerized by the gentle yet powerful sound. The receptionist behind the desk leaned slightly forward, letting herself be carried by the melody instead of worrying about check-ins. For once, the work, the schedules, and the noise of the world outside seemed to vanish. The piano story had captured everything, leaving only the human connection between the music and the listener. The janitor's expression remained calm, but inside he felt a quiet joy. He didn't need recognition or praise. He was simply sharing something that had always lived inside him. This moment wasn't about showing off talent, it was about allowing the music to speak, and trusting that others would listen with their hearts. The notes seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. Every unspoken word and unseen action transformed into something tangible and moving. As he continued, the melody began to rise and fall, creating waves of emotion. The room seemed to breathe along with the music. People leaned slightly forward in anticipation, waiting for the next chord, the next passage. There was a rhythm in the silence as much as in the sound itself. It was a living, breathing experience, and everyone present was part of it. Whether they realized it or not, the janitor's fingers moved across the keys with grace and precision, yet there was no stiffness, no pretense. Each movement was natural, a reflection of the emotions flowing through him. He played not for applause or recognition, but because it was the truest expression of himself in that moment. And the audience, sensing this honesty, responded in kind. There were no distractions, no chatter, no phones. Only hearts and ears, fully present, fully alive. A gentle hush fell over the room as the janitor began to slow the pace slightly. The notes became softer, more reflective, carrying a sense of quiet hope. The melody was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, a shared experience between the pianist and everyone listening. Guests leaned slightly toward the piano, drawn by the intimacy of the music, wanting to hold on to the moment just a little longer. Even the youngest children felt the music's impact. A small boy held his mother's hand tightly, sensing something magical but not fully understanding why. He looked up at the janitor with wide eyes, captivated by the gentle strength of the sound. The music spoke to everyone across generations, reminding them that beauty could come from unexpected places, that quiet people could carry extraordinary gifts. The janitor didn't rush the performance. He let each note linger, letting the emotions sink in, giving the audience time to feel and absorb the story. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others watched, mesmerized, as if trying to remember every detail so they could carry it with them forever. The melody had a way of touching hearts without words, and everyone present felt it deeply. The piano seemed to respond to him, as if the instrument itself had been waiting for this moment. The sound was richer, warmer, and fuller than ever before. Each chord was clear, each note precise, yet there was a softness that made it feel human, vulnerable, and real. It wasn't perfect in the technical sense, but it was perfect in its honesty, and that was what made it unforgettable. The janitor's music carried on, building slowly to a gentle crescendo. The room was completely captivated. Guests who had entered with casual expectations now found themselves immersed in something profound, something that reached beyond the surface of everyday life. It was a rare and extraordinary moment, created not by fame, training, or reputation, but by a man who had lived quietly and finally shared what had always been inside him. When the first full section of the melody came to a close, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. The notes lingered in the air, as if reluctant to leave. Guests exchanged glances, some blinking back tears, others simply smiling softly. There was a shared understanding that something rare and beautiful had just occurred. A quiet, unassuming man had transformed a simple hotel lobby into a space of deep emotion and connection. The janitor's hands rested briefly on the keys, feeling the vibration of the final note fade away. He opened his eyes slowly, looking around at the guests. They were not clapping yet, not speaking, but their faces reflected wonder, awe, and gratitude. In that moment, he understood something important. Music, when played with honesty and heart, could bridge the gap between people, touch souls, and create a memory that would last far longer than any event or celebration. And in that quiet pause, the janitor smiled softly to himself. He had never played for recognition. He had never sought applause. Why? As the janitor continued to play, the room became completely absorbed in the music. The soft, flowing melody seemed to wrap around everyone, gentle yet persistent, pulling at emotions that had been lying dormant. Guests who had been hesitant at first now found themselves leaning closer, as if instinctively drawn into the story that the piano told. There was a kind of magic in the way each note reached deep into their hearts, bypassing thought, and speaking directly to feeling. Some people could not help but let tears fall. A few wiped their eyes quickly, embarrassed at first, but the warmth of the music made such feelings natural, almost unavoidable. One elderly couple held each other tightly, letting the melody carry them back to memories of a long life together, moments of joy and sorrow intertwined. They didn't speak, but their silent connection said everything. The music had given them a gift, a brief return to the past. A shared moment of reflection that only the piano could provide. Nearby, a young woman stood with her arms loosely crossed, trying to hold back the emotions swelling inside her. She could hear the melody, each note telling a story that seemed so familiar yet so personal. Her mind wandered to her own life, the challenges she had faced quietly, the dreams she had put aside. And yet, hearing the music, she felt something shift within her, a sense of hope, a reminder that even in the quietest lives, beauty could flourish. Waiting for the right moment to shine, even the children, usually so full of energy and distraction, were completely captivated. A small boy who had been fidgeting earlier now sat perfectly still, staring at the janitor in awe. He didn't understand all the emotions, but he felt their weight. He sensed the music's honesty and power, and it made him quiet, thoughtful, and even a little reverent. Beside him, his mother watched with a soft smile. Realizing that the piano had touched them both in a way no words could describe, the janitor did not rush the music. He let each note breathe, giving the room time to absorb its meaning. The melody swelled gently, rising and falling like waves on a calm sea. There were moments of stillness, moments of quiet pause, and then gentle crescendos that tugged at hearts. It was as if he was inviting everyone into his world, allowing them to share his inner life without speaking a single word. Each chord, each soft trill, was an expression of years lived quietly, a life filled with small gestures and unnoticed labor. Now transformed into something beautiful, people began to notice the little details that made the performance extraordinary. The subtle strength in his hands, the delicate touch of the keys, the slight tremor in certain notes that gave them life. It was human, imperfect, and perfect all at once. The music was not about technique or showmanship. It was about emotion, sincerity, and connection. And the audience responded instinctively, some holding their hands over their hearts, others leaning slightly forward. Listening as if every note carried a secret meant only for them, the atmosphere in the lobby had completely shifted. The hustle and bustle of the hotel, the chatter of guests, even the distant sounds from outside all seemed to fade away. What remained was the janitor, the piano, and the shared space of emotion that connected everyone present. It was no longer just a performance. It was a collective experience, a moment suspended in time where everyone's attention and feelings were focused on the same source of beauty. The janitor's music deepened. It carried the weight of hidden stories of quiet struggle, of patience, of hope that persisted even when no one was watching. Each note seemed to tell a story of perseverance, of living faithfully in the background while the world moved on. And in that storytelling there was comfort for the listeners. They felt understood, even if the janitor did not know their names or their lives. The universality of music allowed him to speak to them all simultaneously, creating a bond stronger than words ever could. Some guests could barely hold back sobs. A young man, usually composed and serious, felt a lump in his throat as memories of his own lost moments surfaced. A mother, holding her daughter tightly, felt a wave of emotion she hadn't expected, tears spilling as she realized how much she had taken for granted in everyday life. Even people who had been skeptical at first were moved, their expressions softening, their eyes glistening with silent acknowledgement of the beauty unfolding in front of them. The janitor did not need to look at the audience. He played with his eyes closed, focused entirely on the music. But he could feel the presence of the people around him, the quiet gasps, the soft sniffles, the subtle shifts as listeners adjusted to the emotion. It was a dialogue without words, a conversation of souls through sound. Every time his fingers pressed a key, it was a gentle reminder that even small, unseen actions could have extraordinary consequences. A gentle crescendo built, not overwhelming but powerful in its subtlety. Guests were completely captivated. Conversations had ceased entirely. Even the staff paused to watch and listen, their usual tasks forgotten. The bellhop, standing quietly near the entrance, held his card in place, mesmerized. The receptionist behind the desk leaned forward slightly. Her pen paused mid-note as she allowed herself to be absorbed by the music. It was rare to see the entire room so fully present, so united by a single moment. But that was exactly what was happening. The music shifted slightly, becoming tender and reflective. Each note seemed to tell a personal story to each listener. A woman thought of her grandmother, who had once played the piano for her as a child. An older man remembered his youth, the days when life was simpler and the world seemed full of possibility. Even the youngest children felt the emotion, sensing the care and honesty behind every keystroke. The janitor's melody was a bridge between generations, connecting everyone in the room through a shared experience of human feeling. He allowed himself a small smile as he played. This wasn't about recognition, applause, or praise. It was about sharing something deeply personal and true. The music flowed naturally from his heart, carrying every small memory, every quiet dream, and every unseen act of patience and kindness he had ever experienced. And the audience felt it. They could sense the honesty, the humility, and the gentle strength that came through each note. At one point, the melody rose and fell in gentle waves, echoing across the marble floors and high ceilings. The sound seemed to linger in the air, wrapping around the guests like a soft embrace. A couple standing near the window held hands, their eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. A group of young professionals, usually distracted by phones and conversations, now stood completely still, absorbing every sound. Even the manager, who had been worried about the missing pianist, felt tears prick his eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected beauty of the moment. The janitor's hands moved effortlessly, though there was a subtle intensity to each gesture. He was fully present, fully alive in this moment, letting the music speak for him. Every note carried meaning, every pause held emotion. The guests were no longer simply watching a man play the piano. They were experiencing his life, his patience, his quiet persistence, and his ability to see beauty in the everyday. As the melody continued, the room seemed to transform. The hustle and noise of the hotel faded completely. The grand chandeliers, the polished floors, the flowers and decorations, all became a backdrop to something more profound. The piano's sound filled the space with warmth and softness, creating a sanctuary where everyone could feel, reflect, and connect. Even those who had arrived tired or distracted found themselves drawn in, swept up by the power of music born from the heart. The janitor slowed the pace slightly, allowing the audience to absorb the emotions. The melody became reflective, tender, and deeply human. Guests leaned forward, closing their eyes, letting memories and feelings surface naturally. Some were crying openly now. Others simply breathed quietly, overwhelmed by the shared experience. The music carried a gentle, undeniable message. Even those who are unseen, unacknowledged, or overlooked can touch the lives of others in ways that matter deeply. A hush fell over the room, so complete that the faintest sounds of movement seemed loud in comparison. The janitor's fingers lingered on the keys, each note stretching out, resonating with the emotions of everyone listening. There was a connection in the room that went beyond the music itself. It was human, intimate, and profoundly moving. People felt seen, even without speaking, by the honesty and vulnerability in the janitor's performance. Finally, the melody softened even further, the notes delicate and lingering as if reluctant to leave. The music had reached its peak of emotion and was now gently guiding the room back to calm. Guests remained silent, absorbing every lingering vibration, savoring the final moments of something extraordinary. They were fully present, fully alive to the gift that had been offered, and they knew they would carry it with them long after the event ended. The janitor paused, hands resting lightly on the piano, eyes still closed. He had given all of himself to the music, and in return he had touched countless hearts. The audience remained still, caught in the gentle aftermath of the performance, not wanting to break the spell. And in that quiet, suspended moment, it became clear the janitor, a man who had always worked in the background, had transformed the room with something far more powerful than applause. He had created connection, beauty, and shared human experience all through Teich. When the final note lingered and slowly faded, the room remained completely silent for a few heartbeats. The soft echo of the piano seemed to float in the air, wrapping around everyone in the lobby. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the music itself had created a bubble of stillness, holding everyone in a quiet reverence. Then, slowly, the room began to stir, not with ordinary chatter, but with a profound recognition of what had just happened. The guests were the first to react. One by one, their faces lit up with amazement. Eyes glistened with tears, smiles appeared that were full of awe rather than politeness. A few clutched at each other's hands, overwhelmed by the emotional journey they had just experienced. It was not just a performance they had witnessed. It was a story, a life expressed through melody, and everyone felt its depth. Some whispered softly to each other, trying to explain what they had just felt, but words seemed insufficient. The experience had touched something deep, something universal in the human heart. The janitor, still sitting at the piano, allowed himself a small, humble smile. He did not seek applause, though it was now inevitable. He had never played to impress anyone or to gain recognition. The music had been a gift, a simple sharing of what lived quietly inside him, and it had been received in a way he could have never imagined. The thought that his small, unnoticed life could suddenly touch so many hearts brought a gentle warmth to him. A feeling he had rarely experienced in all his years of working behind the scenes. The manager, standing a few feet away, was the first to step forward. His eyes were shining with admiration and surprise. He had known the janitor had talent, had heard whispers of his skill from staff members who had noticed him playing in quiet moments, but witnessing it live in front of an audience was something else entirely. He approached slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet magic that still hung in the air. "Thank you," the manager said, his voice soft but full of sincerity. I didn't realize. I had no idea you could play like this. You've touched everyone here tonight. It's incredible." The janitor nodded humbly, brushing his hands gently over the piano keys as if to release the final echoes of the music. He did not boast, did not linger on praise. He simply acknowledged the words with a quiet, respectful nod, knowing that the moment was about the music, not about him. And yet, deep inside, he felt a sense of quiet validation, a recognition not of ego, but of the truth that even the most ordinary lives could hold extraordinary gifts. Guests began to approach him, some tentatively, some with obvious enthusiasm. They spoke softly, expressing gratitude, sharing how the music had moved them, how it had brought back memories, how it had touched their hearts in ways they could not explain. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Some shook their heads in disbelief, as if trying to understand how someone so quiet, so unassuming, could create something so powerful. It was overwhelming, but the janitor remained calm, listening politely, answering with simple words, never seeking to draw attention to himself. "What you played. It was more than music," one guest said softly. "It felt like you were telling us your life story, and somehow it touched each of us." The janitor smiled gently, choosing his words carefully. "I just played what I felt, that's all. The music was already there, it was just waiting for someone to listen." His voice was quiet, but it carried a sense of wisdom that came from years of living a patient, humble life. There was no arrogance, no pretense, only honesty and sincerity. Even the staff, who had watched from a distance, were moved. The bellhop who had paused mid-task, the receptionist who had stopped writing notes, the cleaning staff who had lingered quietly all felt a shift. The janitor, who had always been part of the background, had become the center of something extraordinary. For the first time, they truly saw him, not as a worker going about his duties, but as a human being with gifts and depth, capable of touching hearts in a profound way. The children in the audience, too, were captivated. The little boy who had sat quietly before now approached the piano, his eyes wide with wonder. "I didn't know someone could make music sound like that," he said softly. "It felt like magic." The janitor looked down at him, a warm, understanding smile forming. "Music can feel like magic when it comes from your heart," he said gently. The child nodded solemnly, understanding more than words could convey, and ran back to his mother, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the lobby remained transformed. Guests continued to talk in hushed, reverent tones, replaying the experience in their minds. Even after returning to their activities, many glanced back at the piano, as if afraid the magic would disappear if they stopped noticing it. The janitor returned to his cleaning tasks, quietly moving about the room, but now, every step felt different. People looked at him differently. They offered polite nods that were filled with genuine respect. They acknowledged him not as the invisible worker in the background, but as someone who had brought beauty, emotion, and humanity into their lives. For the janitor, the evening was not about recognition or fame. He did not need applause or praise. What mattered was that his music had found a way to reach others, to speak to them without words, to create a connection that would last in their hearts long after the notes had faded. That alone was enough. The satisfaction was quiet but profound, the kind of fulfillment that comes from knowing you have shared something true, something deeply personal, and that it has been received with love. As the night wound down, guests began to leave, some pausing to offer final words of thanks or a gentle smile. The janitor watched them go, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. He had spent a lifetime in the background, quietly doing his work, unnoticed and unremarkable in the eyes of the world. But tonight, for just a few hours, he had been seen in a different way. Not for his uniform, not for his role, but for the simple, honest gift he had carried inside him all along. The piano sat silently in the corner now, its polished black surface reflecting the soft light. It had been a witness to something extraordinary, a quiet man revealing the depth of his soul, transforming an ordinary hotel lobby into a space of shared human emotion. And as the janitor finished his final tasks for the night, he allowed himself a small, contented sigh. The music was over, but its impact would linger in the hearts of the guests, the staff, and even in his own life. He walked slowly to the exit, turning off the lights in the lobby one by one. The chandeliers sparkled faintly in the dimming light, and the polished floors reflected the final remnants of the evening. Everything looked as it had before, ordinary and calm, yet the magic of what had happened remained, invisible but undeniable. It was a reminder that extraordinary moments often come from the most unexpected places and people, and that sometimes the quietest among us have the greatest stories to tell. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the janitor felt a quiet sense of completion. The world around him was the same, yet he had changed. He had shared a piece of himself, and it had been received with love and understanding. That feeling, small but powerful, filled him with a sense of peace he had never known before. He knew that he would continue his life as he always had, quietly and diligently, but now there was a new awareness. His life, his presence, his heart, and even his small, unnoticed acts could touch others in ways he had never imagined. The janitor paused for a moment under the night sky, looking up at the stars. He smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement of the invisible connections that exist in the world. The music had spoken, hearts had been touched, and for once he felt fully seen, not for what he did every day, but for who he truly was. And that, more than anything, was enough. As the hotel settled into quiet, the echoes of the piano seemed to linger in the minds and hearts of everyone who had been present. Guests would remember this night, not for the decorations, the event, or the food, but for the simple, unexpected gift of a quiet janitor who played music from his heart. It was a story of humility, patience, and the extraordinary power of sharing one's true self. The janitor had always been invisible, yet in those few precious hours he had reminded everyone that beauty, kindness, and talent often come from the most unexpected places. And as the last guest disappeared into the night, the janitor returned to his small, humble quarters. He sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the evening. There was no need for celebration or recognition. The music had spoken for itself, and that was all that mattered. He knew that life would continue, that the hotel lobby would return to its ordinary rhythm, and that most people might never fully understand the depth of what had happened. But he also knew that for those few hours he had created something timeless, a connection of hearts, a shared experience of beauty, and a reminder that even quiet lives can leave a lasting mark on the world. As he finally lay down to rest, a sense of calm washed over him. The music that had once been confined to his thoughts now existed in the hearts of countless people. He had given a part of himself without expectation, and in doing so had created something larger than himself. It was a gift, not just to others, but to himself as well. In the quiet of the night, the janitor slept peacefully, content in the knowledge that he had lived fully, even if no one had noticed before.